Hello and welcome to WION World Order. We believe dialogue is the first step towards constructive change, and we've created a new platform to talk about issues that are important in the world, urgent issues, to bring in constructive change. This is the second edition of WION World Order, and today's theme is G20 Spotlight Osaka. The 14th G20 Summit is going to be held in Japan, and we are here to set the agenda, talk about the challenges and the opportunities, and we have with us our dialogue partners, 3 serving ambassadors in 1 newsroom. Welcome to all of you. Let me introduce you. Taking diplomacy out of closed doors, we have Walter J. Lindner, Ambassador of Germany. He's a diplomat, musician, someone who's long been associated with India. We have Andre Arjona Correa do Lago, Ambassador of Brazil, a seasoned diplomat, also a prolific author. And Mr. Daniel Chuburu. He is Ambassador of Argentina, a career diplomat who has also worked extensively on marine ecology, I believe. Welcome to all of you. Let's begin with the opening remarks. G20 Summit in Osaka, the 14th summit, begins tomorrow. What do you expect? What are your expectations? What do you think will be the stumbling blocks, if any?
Well, first of all, I think the Japanese have done a great job in preparing this summit. All of us who have prepared the summit know how much work this is. It's not only the work as a summit as such, but you have a lot of meetings beforehand and afterwards. So I think they have done a great work. Now, I think in a world of a globalized world where the topics are more and more complicated, the citizens out there, they don't know, who is doing what and what solutions can be brought up. No country in this planet can do things by themselves. No one. We need a cooperation. We need an international cooperation. We need a rules-based international construct where we can discuss. Now we can discuss in the United Nations. That's good. But of course this is something which is then a process which is ongoing. But we need some actual, some fora where we can discuss things among those who are really acting in the forefront. Now we have the G7, for example, which is the leading nations of industrialized countries. But I think to have a forum, a platform of G20, of developing countries and developed countries, is just very important, because there you can talk about not only the financial and the trade issues, but also about all those global issues which I mentioned, which need a solution urgently, like climate change, like trade issues, like artificial intelligence, like pollution, all the things, terrorism, all the things have to be discussed. And even though there might not be decisive decisions which are binding, but the fact that you have a forum where you can discuss this on the sidelines and in the conference is just important. So I think it's a very timely conference, and I hope we have a consensus outcome.
Ambassador, your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to start also praising Japan. I was ambassador to Japan before coming to India, and I recognize very much the focus, the seriousness, and the objectiveness of Japan in preparing this G20. And I totally agree that the G20 represents a very interesting group of countries. And as you have been working very hard to have their voice more heard in the international arena. We believe we need to have a greater standing in many of the great organizations that we already have. Obviously the UN, by the way, Germany and Brazil and India are together in the G4 and Japan. But also in the trade issues. We have organizations, we want to strengthen WTO, but we know that we are in a transition moment. This is a moment in which many people are perplexed. And I think we have to explain more to the public. We have to make the public understand which are the new challenges, which are the new threats, and which are also the new opportunities that getting together can make us discover and develop.
Right. Ambassador Chuburu.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that I will concur with my colleagues in praising Japan, but not only for the organization of the meeting. I think that the job that they have done, and it's quite important, is what they've done with the agenda of the meeting. And they have been able to keep on moving the agenda from meetings that come Germany 2 years ago, Argentina 1 year ago. So this continuation of the agenda that we have been able to put forward during the last years, I believe it's a great job that they have done. Ambassador Liner was saying, and I completely agree with him, this is a platform in which not only we can see for the governance and the balance of the macroeconomic situation in the world, but I think it gives us a great opportunity to tackle global issues. Global issues in an era of globalization require global responses, and I think that this is the appropriate forum where to do them.
Right. As the name suggests, G20 is a group of 20. Then we have 8 invited countries, 9 organizations like the UN, IMF, World Bank, and so on, and all the issues that you just mentioned. That's an awful lot. Has G20 then become unwieldy?
You know, the basic idea was, before that you had the G7. G7 were the 7 most industrialized countries in the world. And when the Asian financial crisis came up in the end of the 90s, we thought, or leaders thought, it's not enough to discuss this among the 7. So there were ideas by Bill Clinton then and others of a G22 or a G34 or something, experimenting on how many should we include. But then you have, if you have too many, then you go already the way down of a United Nations, and then you have a 40, 50 member group. If you do too little, too less, the number is small, then many countries would feel excluded. So what's the criteria? So they left it intentionally open. So it is now a 20 group, 19 states and 1 European Union, and they have some invited guests, which are sometimes permanent guests, just to highlight that this is a moving body. But I think it's a good idea to have more or less around 20, because otherwise it's getting out of hands, and the discussions take too long, and we have too much the usual things. We as European Unions, we have 28 countries, and we know this how this is to discuss with 28 countries things. It takes a while, and on a global scale where you have different mentalities and different languages, whatever, it takes even longer. So I think 20 is a good number. Whether it's one day or 22 or 18, I don't know. But I think the idea is right.
Right. For a layperson, when we look at all these groupings, and today there was a newspaper article in India which talked about the alphabet soup. There's SAARC, there's BIMSTEC, there's G20, there's a lot of them, and they're seen mostly as talking shops. And most member countries are accused of then not walking the talk. Is it the wrong perception, or is action really missing, and why is it missing?
No, I think it's there is a dimension that maybe is close to that description. But I think that we have to admit, and this is quite difficult, to admit that there is a logic in the negotiations in all of these groups. But what I think we have to improve, including as diplomats, is the communication of this logic and the communication of this dynamic that happens in those groups. And I believe that's what we have to improve. The truth is that, as many times in diplomacy, what is more important is what you have avoided, not what you have achieved. And avoiding things is something that is extremely important in diplomacy, but it's not at all attractive for the media, it's not attractive for the public. And so to achieve a balance in a meeting like that is something that requires lots of meetings, lots of discussions, lots of papers, lots of effort. And I think that we have not been able to show how much work and how much important things have been achieved through avoiding crisis, for instance. In a meeting like that, you have to avoid that some things become a crisis. So you have to deal with them in a way that they don't become a crisis. So I think that all these meetings continue because they have a logic and they have a reason to be. But I think we need to improve enormously the way we communicate what these meetings do.
Right. The primary mandate of the G20, as I understand, was to prevent future international financial crises. Yeah. But now we're talking about everything from terror to cleaning oceans. So have we spread ourselves too thin here?
Well, it's logic that if you're going to have 20 leaders getting together once a year, the agenda will need to grow, because you have to have an holistic approach to what goes on. And it's not only the financial crisis, it's not isolated from some other problems that you have. So necessarily it comes to a point in which you have to see some other issues. And concerning the agenda, I think that there are two ways of looking at the agenda. One is the work, and that was what Andrei was saying, the way the ministers and all the preparations are taking place, and some issues are discussed at that level. And then the main importance of having G20 is that you have the opportunity of having the leaders themselves debating issues that are of interest of the leaders. So mostly what you see in the statement of the G20 is the work that has been prepared during the year. But then you have the possibility of having the meetings of the leaders themselves and talking of the issues that are of importance at that point in time more than the rest of the agenda. Let me specify one issue now, which is the trade situation.
Yes.
And in the trade situation, now you have the possibilities of having together and meeting in the sidelines, US, China, India, all the countries that are the faces of this trade war. So if you want to talk about trade and you want to avoid protectionism, it's a good opportunity to have the leaders themselves involved in that discussion and what happens in the sidelines of the meetings. So it's very good as a prevention of any possible crisis that it's arising to have these kind of meetings.
Is it true that more work gets done on the sidelines than the actual summit?
Yes, it does. That's what makes those meetings a bit doubtful for many people out there, because they think, oh, what's happening there? A recent poll in Germany showed that people are in favor of this G20 summit, but they have no idea what's really happening there. Who is talking with whom? What is pre-organized? Whatever. But it is true. That's the gist of diplomacy. That things are discussed at the sidelines. But I think, as Andrei said, we have to make sure that this is more transparent, and there are press conferences afterwards. Okay, and there's a resume and there is a declaration. That's true, but it should be more open, and a program like this one is exactly the right thing to do, to see that this is not something a clandestine thing. It's something where world leaders come together and take their responsibility. Mm-hmm. That's what they have, because they are the world leaders, and they have to see that they find solutions for this. And if they don't find solutions, then the people out there know, well, there are a few who are against some things. Yeah. So in the end, we might have, hopefully, a lot of consensus, but there might be some decisions or recommendations where we have a 19-1 outcome.
It's interesting you say this as a diplomat, because as I understand diplomacy as an outsider, is that you always leave some room for maneuvering, and what happens behind closed doors happens behind closed doors. You're saying that they should be held accountable for the decisions they take and for the stance they take?
Well, yes and no. I think it's still important that we have these discussions. You need some room to move for compromises. That's true. But also, you always have to think that these decisions are not in the space out there. Mm-hmm. They are relevant for 7.5 billion people on this planet. So at some point, leaders, have to be responsible for their decisions.
Absolutely. Ambassador here mentioned trade, and G20 has been credited with helping avert a shift to protectionism post the 2008 financial crisis. And now we're grappling with protectionism again. Do you believe that this group, with the changed leadership of member countries, can achieve what it did a decade ago?
Well, I think that that's the objective. I think that what we see in this meeting is an open discussion about protectionism in a moment in which some people are calling for more protectionism. So when you see all these leaders together, and they are all from important countries since it's the G20, what you see is that they have a very important weight on the world economy. And I think if you hear what they say, it's very interesting to see that very similar countries can have completely different problems. And this is the opportunity in which you have to understand the other. And in the case of trade, we have seen now these issues here in India between US and India, or the issues between Brazil and other countries. We have to discuss this very openly, because I am sure that at least the three countries that are here, we are completely convinced that protectionism is not going to help. We have to strengthen WTO, we have to have a stronger dialogue, but we have to make sure that protectionism is avoided.
Right, and you've said something very important. It's important to understand the other. We know that there are bilateral problems between member countries, and we know that some leaders are more outspoken than others, and some presidents tweet. So how do such public pronouncements impact the background work that has been done for months behind closed doors?
Well, that's why I told you, I think that it's these two different levels of answers that you get in a communique are coming exactly from that, from the work that has been done previously, and then you add things that might come from the leaders themselves. And of course, the sidelines help for those bilateral problems, because you have the guys over there. So I believe that I do agree with both my colleagues that you have to have more transparency, that you have to have more communication. But in fact, what you have to have are actions coming from the countries that are the ones that reflect the agreement. Because the G20 is not an implementation body itself. So what you have to see afterwards is that what is decided at the level of the leaders in the G20 come to a reality through the actions that are taken in the different organizations. And you ask about trade. Trade is very important, and even in this time in which there is all this discussion about protectionism, the trade wars and all that, in the whole preparation of Japan, you can find that there are a lot of movements in a positive direction towards an open and free trade world economy, in which you have references to the WTO and the needs that you have to modify its functioning. There is a specific declaration that talks about protectionism in the field of agriculture. This has not been possible in many years, and then it's becoming a possibility. You have the mentioning of subsidies in fisheries, which is another very important issue. You have the need to strengthen the subsidies in industrial, to strengthen norms in the industrial goods. So there are a lot of things that you'll see in this process that are exactly what we expect, and that we congratulate Japan from what they have been doing in this preparation, because they have been able to move the whole thing, although there is this tension in the trade arena.
Yes, and you said that what is decided here is not binding, and yet we've seen that on multilateral forums there have been decisions which have been binding, and then some countries have unilaterally walked out of those pacts. So is there a fear now more than ever that bilateral issues tend to overshadow the multilateral agenda?
That's what we all are afraid of. That's why we want to support multilateralism and rule-based international structures. The whole, I mean, the matter of the gist of the matter is that with these complicated issues which we have in the world, and with 7.3 billion people, how do we organize a body who makes decisions on the world as a globe. There's only one institution, which is the United Nations, but the main security or decision body is not representing the reality of today, the Security Council. It's the reality of 48. And the fact that India, 1.4 billion people are not there, is not there. If it wasn't so sad, it would be the biggest joke, but it is just not acceptable. That Latin America is not there, it's not acceptable. That Africa is not there, not acceptable. But still we have the Security Council. We have to reform it. Since this is not reformed, there was G7 and there were now the G20. So now maybe the G20 is not a perfect body, but show me another body who could do this. So that's why we have to work with what we have, even if the decision-making there is different, it's a consensus-based, and it's more, as I said, a platform. And as I said, it's not only what you see today in the news and tomorrow that they sit together around the table. You have the Sherpa meetings beforehand, you have the working group meetings, you have the engagement groups. They're the engagement group for women, for youth, for NGOs and for think tanks. So this is a kind of a global marketplace. Mm-hmm. Unless we have anything better, I think it's the best we have.
Right. I'm trying to understand what goes on behind the scenes as well. In the last 10 years, a lot has changed. Heads of state, of course, have changed. Global alliances have shifted. Geopolitical equations have shifted. And the way diplomacy is done has also shifted. A lot of it is spelled out in the open now. How does this impact a grouping like a G20 where, as you said, there's so much structure and yet so much is vulnerable to what may change?
Well, I think that obviously because of the social media and because of so much information that we have today, I think that all our governments have to explain to their population that have elected them what they plan to do, what they are doing, what are the obstacles, etc. So that is one of the interesting points, is that when our leaders go to a meeting like the G20, they also have to, they know what the others are saying to their public, and they have to adjust something that can be an international agreement. And at this moment in which you were saying politics about tweeting, it's essential today in politics. But this is very much directed to the population of the country that have elected the leader, which is totally legitimate, because if you've been elected by the people, you have to explain to the people what you're doing. But also, when you go out, you have to obviously deal with many realities. And obviously, all these leaders are supposed to defend the interest of their own countries. And how do you do that? How do you adjust your ideals to the realities of the world? I think this is the great challenge that diplomats have to do today, because when I talk about transparency, and I'm happy that we all agree on that, transparency doesn't mean shouting about these issues. No, transparency means explaining these issues, because we have been very superficial sometimes in dealing with some of the greatest challenges we have today. And the G20 reveals the complexity of the different priorities, of the different challenges that each country, as important as they are dealing today. And we have to respect, we have to understand, and our leaders have also to explain to their own constituencies that that was possible because of this was not possible because of this. I think this is the transparency, true dialogue.
Indeed. Another rallying point has been terrorism, and for many years we've been fighting a global war on terror in different capacities. Different countries have contributed. Who is winning this war, if anyone?
Well, it's very difficult to say who's winning the war. I think that we are doing through the G20 as much as possible. And in this regard, I want to go back a little bit on the question of terrorism itself. And this is, terrorism is something that is very new in the agenda of the G20. It came from the declaration of in Germany, and then there was a declaration in Buenos Aires, and now we hope that we will have a declaration. But it's not even called terrorism. It's within You'll find it in a digital economy. There are 2 paragraphs about terrorism. And this is because what I tried to say before, the G20 is not an implementation organization. So it's not that you're going to implement anything through what you have. The discussions on terrorism are being given in the appropriate bodies that you have in other organizations. Let's say, as I was saying, in the UN or within other fora that are more specific for that issue. The main question is those organizations are the ones that have to implement measures concerning terrorism. And you do it through those organizations and through bilateral agreements to increase cooperation in this field. Because if you don't do cooperation in the field of terrorism, there's no way. I said it before. Global problems require global answers. So this is the very best example on how we have to discuss these kind of issues, although it's not a macroeconomic issue or not a financial issue, but we have to discuss it because it's the possibility of coordinating that kind of cooperation that finally we are going to take forward to the appropriate organizations or to the appropriate actions that the different countries are taking.
Right. Is war on terror the best way then to tackle extremism? And are we making our efforts in the right space, considering so much of this has moved on the cyberspace and we're fighting a physical war elsewhere?
Let me just 1 second come back to what Daniel has said. Even financial aspects deal with terrorism, like money laundering. Where do the Al-Qaeda guys get their money from?
Yeah.
It's from money. It's in money laundering or drug dealing or this kind of thing. So everything is connected, and terrorism has to be eradicated from this planet. How do we do this? Can we do this? Because the world is not only good; there are also bad people. Will we avoid this in future? I doubt it. But we have to do the measures to minimize the risks for all of us. All of the nations, I guess all the G20 nations, have been victim of terrorism. So each terrorism might be a bit different, but the violence is there and the fanatics are there. Now, there's, of course, the diehards, you only can deal with them with robust manner. But it's a complicated issue because it very often it's also connected to social questions, religious questions and others. So it's not that simple. Of course, we have to find a way to protect our citizens and to give the right answers to those radical fanatics which are, you can't really talk to them. But we have a wide variety of other measures which have to aim on preventing that more people are radicalized. The youth should not be radicalized. It's unemployment. There's many things connected with it. But coming back to your question, of course, the right answer to the total radical terrorists is very robust.
Right. And you said everything's connected. So then the last ministerial meeting of G20 also talked about digital security. And we've spoken about human-centric artificial intelligence, DFFT, that is data-free flow with trust. Can we and should we then have common laws to police data and the cyberspace?
Well, this is an issue that is quite recent and has grown exponentially. And so I believe there is perplexity in front of all the things that we've been seeing that are happening. And in front of all the opportunities that have been created by new technology for the bad use of new technologies. So I think, yes, this is a major issue. This is an issue I think that most of us are still learning, are still trying to understand. And I believe that this is the absolute objective case in which G20 has to deal with, because it has an impact on economics that is incredible. Because we are facing, developing countries like Brazil, we are facing a change in the profile of sectors that has been extremely quick and has been extremely difficult for developing countries that have been following a certain path of development that had a specific logic, and certainly all these elements are interfering with the plan. So we need to have a very strong international understanding about that so that we can avoid, before they happen, the major disruptions that this can cause.
Right. Another theme that is being talked about this time is human-centered future society. Again, a very, very noble idea. But how do you achieve it? And is the developed world, you believe, ready to bear the cost that something like this entails?
Well, I believe that this is very much linked to what Walter was saying. One of the things that nowadays is criticized of globalization is that it has not been able to distribute the benefits, the economic benefits of the growth that we have shared in international arena. So if you are going to do it human-centered, what you have to make sure, and this is one of the aims of the G20 at this point in time, is to work on the distribution of that wealth that has been created. Because as far as you don't create wealth and you keep on making bigger the difference between one extreme and the other, there is where you create the possibilities of good basis to develop extremist ideas. So I believe that one of the most important things that we have to do now is try to strengthen globalization more than it is, but try to work on how we distribute the benefits of that wealth that is being created.
Coming back to the point about data security, there's something that I wanted to ask. These are very serious and pertinent concerns, but do you believe that sometimes they get reduced to company-specific and country-specific rivalries? Like we talk about data security and then there's the question of Huawei and how the world is dealing with it.
Well, I think with the new technology, with digitalization, with artificial intelligence, with the robotronic, all this is, as Andre said, it's pretty new, but we have to find rules for it. We have to, otherwise it's the law of the jungle and everything is possible. We have to find a way how to tax digital or international companies. We have to find a way, what kind of ethic do we apply on the masses of data? Are they free out there in any clouds? And are they free for everyone without data protection? I doubt so. So we have to find a kind of a way how to deal with it. Now, if you have the Huawei case, now on one side you have the necessity of protecting the states against any espionage from outside. Mm. On the other side, you have the free economy that everyone can present their products. Mm. Now, our point of view is that we should be very careful and find a balance between the two things. But we want to make the decision according to our national needs, and that's what we do. But once again, I think it's very important, and it's one of the topics which we have in Japan, the future-oriented things like the future of work. This is very dear to Prime Minister Modi also, and how we shape this. What do we do with when robots take over all these factories and we have no more jobs there because they are all done by the robots? What do we do in future? And this is a problem for all of the countries, so that's why the 20 have to also think about these things. And I'm happy they're not talking only about the regular trade and these issues, but also about these things on the sidelines or in the conference. But I think it's important to put it there, and maybe we find it also in the final declaration.
Yes, the conversation, the beginning always helps, and yet those old pending issues remain. The WTO reforms are expected this year and much talked about as well. Can the G20 really restore what Ambassador here also said, a multilateral rules-based order at the WTO? Yes,
WTO, I believe, was an enormous achievement. You remember this was a discussion for decades about the creation of succeeding to create the WTO. And the fact is that what you need with these international organizations, that's what the public must understand, is that This is the place where you bring the issues, you discuss the issue, and this organization can get expert and can distribute the information to all and have really an open discussion about the great challenges that we have. So multilateralism, I think, have been confused today with talk shops with no results, etc. But the fact is that multilateralism has been extraordinarily successful. If you take, for instance, the main objectives of these organizations in the post-war, they have been achieved. They have avoided disasters in all contexts, from wars, from nuclear arms. There were enormous progress in many of these issues. Obviously, we all have our personal opinions. We think there should have been more progress in here or more progress in there. But the fact is that the international organizations keep something that today is more and more essential, which is information. The highest level possible information, experts' information, so that decisions are based on this high-quality information. So the strengthening of WTO is an absolute priority for us and is an absolute priority for the countries that are conscious on how that the best way to deal with the complexity that we have in front of us is a strong multilateralism.
Indeed. Another urgent concern is climate change and environment. And this summit specifically talks about tackling marine plastic waste. So we'll begin with that. How serious is the problem, and how hopeful are you that this damage can still be arrested?
Well, I think that this is one of the biggest issues that you find in the climate change environment, and that has not been tackled appropriately till now, except by different private initiatives that have taken place. Those private initiatives have taken some ships that are going into the Pacific and are collecting plastics, and with those plastics they are recycling and doing a lot of things. But I believe that this private action done by an NGO has brought us the attention of what really is going on and how the seas are being polluted, and what's the consequence of all these plastic throwing into the seas, that it's damaging very much the life in the sea. And a lot of people depend on that life. A lot of people depend on what's going on with fishing in those lakes. A lot of countries are suffering the consequences in their own coast. So there is a lot of dangers that come out of this irresponsible way of managing plastics by the different countries. We think that there are 4 basic pillars in which we have to work in this area, and it's not only concerning the production of plastic and the kind of materials that you use so you can recycle those plastics and you can do it in a sustainable way. The second one is the sustainable use of plastics, and in which we think that we have to shift on the all one-use plastics to different kind of materials that can allow us for a better disintegration of those materials. The third one is the application of the 3 R's, how you collect, can you recycle, and how you give a reuse to what you are doing. And in this regard, I think that the possibility of having a good management of the trash, it's very important.
Indeed.
And fourthly is how you take direct measures on how to save the sea and how to apply in your coast the possibility of collecting doing this recollection of plastics, and how you do it in a way that it's sustainable and that it's worth for the rest of the countries, because the sea is a common value that we have for all.
Right. 477 investors have recently joined hands, and they hold $34 trillion in investments. So that's almost half the world's invested capital. And they have come together to urge governments to take urgent action on climate change. Is climate policy still bad politics? Because what we saw in France in terms of the Yellow Vest protests was not a very good sign for most governments.
I'm happy you come up with this topic, because I think we have one planet. If we mess it up, it's gone. We have nothing to give to our children and children's children. And it's 5 to 12. It's population growth. It's the scarceness of natural resources, and it's climate change, global warming. And there's still people out there who think there is no global warming. Now we have in the Paris Treaty, which was dealing with climate change, we have an agreement that 1.5%, well, 2% should be the maximum of increase. 2% is already a lot, because many small island states say 1.5 and we will survive, otherwise we are gone. Mm-hmm. Ask people in the Maldives or in Nova Scotia and these places. Anyway, so this is a very important topic. You see it even in India. You have in Chennai no water, then you have the monsoon maybe delayed, and then you have less and less agricultural land in the country. So there is a climate change going on. And maybe it's the most important topic of all the politicians to do something there, because if we have no planet to conserve, then why do we need armies? Why do we need international agreements? Forget it. There's nothing to preserve. So that's why we have to focus and ask all our politicians. In Germany we do that. And the European election was very much focused on environmental topics, that we are considering topics like plastic, but also like clean energy, renewable energy. What do we do with the wastewater? Clean the Ganges. This is utmost important. So I think all our red flags should go up and say, well, this is the most important topic we have to talk about. And all our policy should be aimed at these things. This is beyond the next, beyond a constituency or beyond the next 5 years of an election. It has to be done in a longer term, but we have to do. If we don't do it now, it's too late.
Right.
Might be too late.
Right. I think everyone agrees that action needs to be taken, except for those who still believe climate change is a hoax. The debate is on who is going to take the action and who's going to do how much. What role do you see for countries like India and Brazil?
Well, I think that climate change discussions have advanced extraordinarily. First, when they really started in the 80s, people thought that this was not going to gain a political dimension, and I think that today, as you were mentioning, politically it's undisputable that it's a central issue. The other dimension is the scientific dimension. We have, I think, also today enough scientific information and enough scientific discussion about not only the problems but also many of the solutions. But the third dimension is quite complex, is the impact of climate change on economics. And this is something that still needs to progress, because there are, in all countries, be it Germany, Brazil, or Argentina, there are sectors of the economy that are very committed to combat climate change, and others that are less committed, because there is an economic impact, a gigantic economic impact. And in the case of India and Brazil, we have developing countries. We are developing countries. We have a great number of our population that still lack basic needs. And so it is very important that we can have the instruments to what everybody loves to call as leapfrog. We have to overcome some of the mistakes that were made by some countries during their periods of development. So I think that in that context, and a bit what Daniel was saying, we have to work very, very strongly on unsustainable patterns of production and consumption. And that's what we need in countries like ours that are going necessarily to increase their consumption. but we need to have financial resources, technology, etc., etc. But this discussion is very focused in the Convention on Climate Change that has the Paris Accord as its latest achievement. So I believe that consciousness about this is very important, and consciousness also that we have answers to most things, but these answers have to have an economic logic to really progress and to have everybody on board. So you're mentioning all these companies, it's true. But if you see, there are many sectors of the economy that still have a reluctance regarding this. So we need lots of information, we need lots of debate on solutions, even more for countries like India and Brazil that still have so many people that lack the basic needs. And obviously, we need to find intelligent ways of increasing their quality of life and making sure that we, if possible, leapfrog, even compared to advanced economies like Germany or others, that obviously went through a longer period for their development, but that, as you know, energy, all these issues that are so complex in climate change have impacted a lot.
Right. Before I wrap, I have to ask you this. You spoke about inequity, you spoke about the disparity, and a recent United Nations report said that when climate action happens, the poor countries will suffer more and the rich will pay and get away. How do we make sure that climate action does not punish some more than the others?
Well, this is what they too have been saying till now. The evidence is there, solutions are there. What we need to know now is how we cooperate among ourselves so as to get the financial resources that are needed to put in place those actions that have already been developed. Because we all know that it's much better to use clean energies than coal or oil. But the problem is how you make that transition between the fossil energies to the new and renewable energies. That has a cost, and that cost has to come from somewhere. What we have to coordinate is an intelligent and clever way of how financing all those measures in order to have that common planet, because it's only one, and we spare it, we will not have any future.
Indeed. This summit, as the Japanese have put it, and I'm quoting from their from the G20 website, is about promoting free and open, inclusive and sustainable human-centered future. It is being built as a forum for endless possibilities. So here's hoping, as we wrap this, that these are not just high-sounding words but achievable targets. I'm going to thank you all for joining us here on the second edition of WION World Order. Thank you.
Thank you.